Policy Development and Strategic Direction Committee for January 17th, 2023. We've taken attendance and we have full complement of councillors and staff. I'd like to open the floor for a nomination for position of chair. Councillor Miller.
I'll nominate Councillor Coleman.
Councillor Coleman, do you accept? Is there any more nominations? Councillor Pierce. And can I have a seconder to close? Councillor Kyle, thank you. Is there nominations for the position of vice chair? Councillor Coleman.
I'll nominate John Bell.
Councillor Bell, do you accept? Is there any more nominations? Councillor Chambers.
I'll move that nominations be closed.
Thank you. And a seconder to close? Thank you. Councillor Oakley.
Welcome, everybody. Approval of the agenda. Any additions? Councillor Chambers?
Mr. Chairman, one of the items on the agenda is a delegation. And I just wanted to point out that the delegations are obliged to follow our procedural bylaw just like council members are. And one of the rules or regulations in our procedural bylaw, it's fairly clear. It's the delegation, any delegation must be free from any threat of litigation. And I noticed on the application for the delegation that a note has been made by the delegate. I'll just quote, "I truly intend to commence legal proceedings to compel it to do so, it being the council." So I'm just wondering if you could advise the delegation prior to his delegation of that particular rule, and that would make everyone happy.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could add one item under other business.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to give a brief summary of the first ad hoc committee on unintended consequences of urban intensification, which was held just before this meeting.
Duly noted. Anything else? Someone want to move to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor McAlpine. All those in favor? Carried. Anybody got a pecuniary interest to declare at the appropriate time? We have one delegation tonight. Mr. Farley, I believe you're on Zoom. Am I correct?
Yes, good evening.
And I hope you duly noted what Councillor Chambers said.
Absolutely, and I withdraw that. So.
Thank you. Proceed when ready.
Yeah, really just like to submit a request to stop train whistling at the Broadway Street West Crossing in Paris. I believe there's a detailed procedure set out by Transport Canada on one of their government websites, and I can send that link to your clerks if that's helpful.
Are you done, sir?
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry.
Oh.
Try to keep it quick and to the point for you.
I like them short and sweet. Questions? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Fairley. I didn't catch your address at the beginning of your presentation, but and that may not be super relevant. I will say that I've lived within 2 or 3 blocks of that crossing for 50 years, and this subject has come up a couple of times during my term in council. It's a difficult subject, and part of the reason why is I can think of at least one occurrence 30 odd years ago where a family that lived on Spruce Street, their daughter was hit by a train at that crossing. And so I've always been reluctant to look at any steps that might reduce the level of safety at that crossing. If such an accident could happen even with whistles, I worry about. So I guess my question for you is can you speak a little further to your experience and you've presented a pretty strong written portion of your delegation. I just wonder if you might speak a little bit more to us about it.
Yeah, and of course it's deeply saddening to hear of occurrences like that, and they do occur. But rather than get into a debate on this matter here, I think that there's actually a very clear process that's set out, and I really would just like to get that process started. I've got really nothing more to say to that. I'm afraid, other than please let's just follow the process that's set out in the law, and if there's a decision that's made to keep the whistling, then that's absolutely fine. But yeah, I don't want to get into a debate here and now on the whys and wherefores. I've made my case pretty clear in the online sort of request to appear as a delegate, so I'd just like to leave it at that, if that's okay. Thank you.
Just, yeah, I read the present, or what was submitted, but I don't know, did the delegate, through Mr. Chair, did he approach the rail CNCP? What's their response if he did?
That is not the process. The process is clear in that you initially have to approach the municipality, and then that conversation happens between the municipality and whoever is responsible for operating that rail.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? We thank you for your presentation. How does the committee want to deal with it? Mr. Mayor?
Motion to receive.
Seconder. Councilor Oakley. Any discussion? Mr. Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree to receive it. From time to time, we have representatives from the rail companies here for one reason or another, and perhaps if we can remember to bring the issue up at that time with the representatives, it may be helpful. I know there are other places that have the same problem. The village of Princeton is a continual victim of the train noises, etc. The great irony of this, I think, is, if you recall at the last planning committee meeting, one of the applications had a submission from the rail company asking for a noise study of the application, and it seems a little bit presumptuous of the rail company to ask for a noise study at the same time being a creator of great noise and discomfort to the urban areas. So if we can remember perhaps to bring the issue up when a representative is here, that one might be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Anything else? We'll call the question. All those received? Thank you. Adoption of the minutes from back in September 13th, 2022. Somebody want to move it? A long time ago. Moved by Councilor Pierce, second by Councilor Bell. Any errors or omissions, if anybody can remember? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Nothing noted. Consent items. 8.1, items to be approved, none of us listed. 8, consent items to be received, 8.2. 8.2.1, recreation master plan status. There's a report. How do you want to deal with it? Councilor Miller?
I will move it to get it on the floor, and maybe you can open it up to questions, or I don't know if there's a presentation or not, but I have a couple questions when the time comes.
Mr. Mayor? You want to report on it, or you want? Or you get questions, Councilor Miller?
I'll ask a question, if that's okay with you. Just page 38 of our package. It says that ensure that community fundraising is included as part of all future major facility developments. And then the new piece is the Paris Lawn Bowling Clubhouse. I'll just say that I'm a big believer in community fundraising being part of that. I totally agree with it. It gives the local people, it gets them invested in the project, obviously financially, but emotionally too. If you're looking at fundraising, it also gauges how well a project is desired by the local community. Obviously, the province agrees, because when you build a new hospital, they say you have to raise 10% of that money locally. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, through you to Cindy, do we have a best practices for how much we have to raise, or a policy? Not that I'm aware of, but do we have that, or something like we have to raise 10% or 25%, or they have to raise a minimum of 10%, or it doesn't go forward? So just wondering if we had any direction on that.
Through the chair to Councillor Miller. We do not have a formal policy on setting that. Having said that, it was identified through the Recreation Master Plan that the county should aim for up to 25% of the capital cost towards construction of a new build. So we use that as a baseline when we come to council and recommend the fundraising campaign.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. To you, Cindy, through the chair. So if I see Paris Lawn Bowling Clubhouse, that would be the aim then, is to do 25% local fundraising, if I'm hearing you correctly?
Through the chair, that is, again, a baseline, and council will see a report on that particular facility next week at the Admin and Operations Committee. The report does reference the local club's desire to raise some funds themselves, and I think that we would look at supplementing that as well.
Okay, and thank you for that answer. And again, it's something I agree with, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Cindy. On page 53 of our report, we talk about Green Lane Sports Complex and the dog park and the development of active transportation to those destinations. Can you give us a sense of when we might see those active transportation routes in place?
Through the chair, I know staff are working on that right now in terms of developing the plans. Unfortunately, I can't give you a specific answer on the timeline, but I will go back and follow up with staff on where they're at.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Carried. Staff reports, 9.1, residential parking, community context review. There is a recommendation. Somebody want to put it on the floor? Moved by Councillor Bell, second by Councillor Howes. Brandon, I bet you got a presentation.
Through the chair, I do indeed. So thank you.
Like a guy that steps that way to the microphone.
I'll try and keep this short and sweet as well. So we're here tonight. First of all, my name is Brandon Courtleaf. I'm a policy planner here at the County of Brant. This is kind of a collaborative project, a collaborative review. of sorts. So there are some other staff available here to answer questions as well if we have them. So we have Greg Bergeron, Manager of Enforcement Regulatory Services here, Greg Demers, Director of Roads, and Julie Tott, Development Technologist, are all available for questions afterwards as well. So like I said, this is a collaborative project. So we took a community kind of look, a context look at residential parking, the challenges we're having with that particular item. And we looked at design of subdivisions. We looked at a number of different components of that. So I'll run through those kind of very quickly for the benefit of council here, or for the committee here, as well as the public that may be watching. Just to summarize the project, this was kind of initiated by council resolution in September of 2022. We had done some preliminary research before that. It was always something we were kind of tracking. That was kind of the formal date that this was initiated. We moved forward with some research. We have collected some findings and recommendations, so those are before you this evening. And then we're kind of providing some next steps in short, medium, and long-term implementation. So where did we start? We kind of looked at what's wrong, what are the challenges we're having here with residential parking in particular in the new developments that we're seeing. What do we want to do with all of this stuff? So we're looking at the challenges here, the quantity of spaces, the safety of road users, kind of our standards and implementation, and the general provincial direction and policy direction through our official plan. We had some objectives for this particular project. So definitely providing adequate parking for people, whether that be private or on street. Ensuring the street safety for all of the users involved, managing resident expectations, that's a key one, kind of creating made-in-grant solutions. We say that a lot in policy planning. That's something we're pushing for. We're a very unique kind of municipality in the various policy settings. So that made-in-grant solution is very key. And then obviously applying those solutions consistently. There we go. All right, so our research. We looked at several influencing factors. Those are all outlined in the report as well. And we tried to mimic that same kind of model, referencing those factors and then how we can kind of work to solve or address them. So you'll see here two particular images on this slide. One of them on the very far right shows our parking complaint hotspots. So you'll see that there are a number of areas in the yellow that's shown kind of the highest area of concentration for the complaints. You'll see a lot of that is situated in newer subdivisions. And then the map in the middle here shows kind of our ongoing development situation in Paris. And we'll speak to the solutions that we have presented and how they'll be impacted or how they will impact some of those developments. We speak to specifically resident needs. So how many parking spaces, what sizes of parking spaces they're needing, our general transportation system components, limited transportation or public transportation options is one of those components. And then the idea that we're very kind of car-centric, that's just the reality here. And we have some more information about that in particular. Then general policy direction, our regulatory instruments, so those are the bylaws that control how this all kind of works and is implemented. General subdivision design, so making sure we're designing things properly to meet the needs of all residents. And then public engagement and education, so how we can properly address some of the shortfalls that people are noting or some of the issues people are noting and how we can get those across to people to inform them and let them know what those expectations and realities are. So some of the findings, and these are outlined more in detail in the report. Many of our households have more than 3 vehicles. That's been increasing in the County of Brant over the last 10, 15 years. We see some of our transportation system components. So modes, those are the mobile components of the system. Our infrastructure, so fixed supportive elements, so that would include parking. Our networks, so organizing how all those things are linked, and then the general flow of the transportation. And you'll see 92% of our residents use their cars for their daily trips. That's a reality that we need to address kind of in our policies, but then we need to balance that with the policy direction generally, which is to influence travel behavior and generally reduce the need for automobiles over the long term. So they're a very high-level approach to this particular issue, but we did kind of dive into specifics as well. And I'll show kind of 3 slides here. So some parking realities in the County of Brant specific to where those hotspots are. We looked at approved dwelling unit numbers. We looked at the amount of vehicles that are parked outside in various times of the day. So we did some midday, midweek looks, and we used some drone footage just to kind of see how these subdivisions are looking, to track what's working and what's not. And then, of course, we looked at the plans to see what was approved, so whether that be particular to a condominium development or on-street parking. So this is an example from the north end. The previous was from the south end. And you'll see, so dwelling unit number 71 shown roughly in that photo. And then the amount of vehicles parked outside kind of ranged from 25 to 65. So that number of the vehicles is still well below the number of dwelling units. And knowing that in a lot of situations our residents have 2 or 3 vehicles, maybe we're not doing too badly with parking in that specific situation. And then just another example from the south end. So we did look at those very kind of zoomed in particularities and kind of evaluated them with the overall kind of comprehensive look at this issue. And so findings as well, we looked through our regulatory instruments. So there are several bylaws that influence or control on-street parking. So we have our zoning bylaw. It doesn't necessarily control on-street parking, but it does influence it, and that comes in the way of frontages and setbacks, landscaped open space in your front yard. We have bylaws that control road use and maintenance, and then we have standards that are in place for, say, curb cuts and where your servicing is placed in the right of way. So all of those things kind of come into play and impact the situation, the realities. So each of these bylaws and standards is about 5 to 10 years old. So we recognize maybe there is some time for review, time to look at these things and make a few updates. Generally speaking, our zoning standards for parking, both residential and commercial, are on par with similar municipalities, but we would benefit from an update to some of these regulatory instruments. Public engagement and education in particular, we've noted that parking related complaints have doubled since 2020. So parking improvements have been made as part of the Brant Safe Streets program. And then something that we did note is that driveway widenings on private property are regulated through zoning and grading reviews, but they're not tracked and not kind of reviewed maybe in a way that they could. So there is some room for improvement in each of those situations. Subdivision design, this is a key one, and this is kind of a finding that maybe won't impact the stuff that's in place right now. Those subdivisions are designed, they're built. Many of the subdivisions that are being built or to be built, the designs have been kind of finalized for those, and the expectation is that we would kind of have these designs put in place ahead of time. So there will be some kind of mitigating ways that we'll have to address things to mitigate the issues that we know are going to happen. But moving forward, we're looking at detailed design interventions that can improve on-street parking from this complete streets perspective. And as you'll note, there is a design guideline that's attached as a recommendation of this report, and that's meant to kind of steer developers in line with our objectives, to let them know, hey, this is an issue. The design of your subdivision is really impacting that, and we would like to help you achieve to meet our objectives. So providing detailed guidance on these requirements for development submissions is also key, and we've had ongoing discussions with the development community. I was speaking with some folks from the Home Builders Association so that they know this report is here. We've had these discussions with them to provide us feedback. We know that other municipalities have put these things in place as well. So we're trying to kind of do a broad look and make sure all of the folks that have interest in this are at the table and having discussions with us. And so that brings me to the recommendations of the report. And just to summarize them, they kind of approach things in a high level, medium level, and kind of closer level. And that's to say the scope of those as well, kind of short, medium, and long-term application. So one of them in general, it's not included in the recommendations per se, but is for the county to undertake a parking strategy in the future. That is also a recommendation of our transportation master plan. And that would look at various components of parking and how it's kind of undertaken in the county, and make sure that they're all aligned properly, whether that be parking in the downtown core versus in the residential areas. It kind of makes sure that all those pieces are working together. Education and resources will be a key component of the recommendations. We do have some resources available online for folks already. but we're looking at providing some additional resources and getting that information together and out as early as possible, especially for new residents or residents in subdivisions that are under construction, so that they're very aware of where they can and cannot park. Provided as well as a design guideline as a recommendation. So this is just an example here, making sure that kind of the minimums between driveways lines up with the minimum separation requirements of our regulatory bylaws, putting that all in one place for the developer so that there's kind of a shopping list of things that they can use to guide their design. And again, just visual guidelines in general, and that will kind of come into play with the education and resources. Regulatory instruments, so we are proposing kind of collaboration between all of the instruments to make some updates. So whether that be the parking bylaw, road use bylaw, and entrance bylaw, so that there's a bit more of a flexible and controlled opportunity for maybe lower boulevard parking or driveway separation. Those discussions are ongoing with staff. We've noted concerns with those types of things, but we've also seen them used in other municipalities. So there are opportunities for solutions here to explore. Updating our development and engineering standards just to consider how on-street parking is coordinated with the newly developed design guidelines. And then even an update to the zoning bylaw, looking at larger garage spaces, updating setbacks for garage spaces to allow tandem parking, and looking at our front yard landscape open space requirements so people have maybe a little more space to park in their front yard. And some of this stuff can also be implemented through pilot projects, and that's something we're exploring with staff as well. That way we can see what works and what doesn't work, and if it's not worth implementing, then we can report back to council and let you know. So the implementation items are itemized in the recommendation of the report. We've tried to keep it straightforward in case there's additions or changes that need to be made. But generally speaking, it's a collaborative effort with the parking challenges that we're working together with staff, and some of the various components will be implemented or taken on by different staff members. But those are kind of outlined a bit further in the report as well. So that is a brief summary of a long, long report, I suppose, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll hand it back to Chair Coleman.
Thank you, Brendan. Questions? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Brandon. Great report, Brandon. Thank you. That's a lot of it. Excuse me, a lot of good information. I love the sounds of the larger garages. And I guess my questions, a couple questions. Would it be accurate to say that, to reinforce the message that anything that we change in our design and bylaws related to parking only influences residential development applications where the site plans have not been finalized? Therefore, there will be hundreds of homes built in Paris the old way. And then I have one other question after that.
Through the chair, so that is a safe assumption. There will be some stuff that we can implement and try and work with developers on, but generally speaking, with the way that development works, we're meant to have things kind of in place 5-10 years in advance. We don't see really that until it rolls out 5-10 years down the line. So there will still obviously be some lag time to this, but there are ways that we can mitigate in various components. Zoning is kind of one of the ones that that's one of the ones that'll lag, so to speak, but there are other standards and bylaws that we can update that can help add or mitigate in the meantime.
Thank you. And my other question is related to the lower boulevard option that has been used in Wilmot and I think London. Has anyone from our staff spoken to any staff from those communities to see how that's worked and if there's been some successes and it's an all year thing, not just during snowplow season, right? But I am wondering what happens during snowplow season. So I just a little more detail on that one, please.
Sure, I'll just start this one and then maybe I'll ask Greg or even Julie to chime in a little bit more. So what we're doing here is just kind of presenting some options from other municipalities. We have had some conversations with folks from those municipalities. We have staff that have worked in other municipalities, so we've been able to kind of see what works and what doesn't, and express our concerns. But I guess from a maintenance perspective, I'll maybe ask Greg Demers to speak to that, and he can speak to it particularly, I guess, with snow plows and that type of thing with the boulevard parking.
Through the chair, thank you, Brandon. I've not had an opportunity to talk to Wilmot or London about the successes of the program, so I'd hate to venture out and say anything without speaking to them first.
Any more questions? Councillor Bell.
Mr. Chair, through you to Brandon. Brandon, you say in the report that the reality is that many of our current issues are being set in approved designs and cannot be changed, but only mitigated once constructed. Can you give us a rundown of which subdivisions that are well known in this table are able to be changed and which ones can't?
Through the chair, so I do have a map on the slides that I showed this evening that has some of that information in it. I probably can't list them off the top of my head to be certain, but there are many of the ones that are draft plan approved, because they have their lotting fabric already determined. There won't necessarily be changes that we can make to that, unless the developer is willing to do kind of a red line change. As we know, the majority of the subdivisions in Paris have that approval already. I think there's one or two submissions that maybe don't, kind of in the north end. But aside from that, a lot of the other developments will have those things set in stone already, and the mitigative efforts will have kind of more of an impact there. But that's not to say we can't approach those developers and have further discussions about if there is some willingness to make adjustments to the plans.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Brandon. I think I would probably characterise it that there's probably one or two big subdivisions still to go, but the rest are actually kind of set in concrete. So that, to me, makes it more important in a sense that we move forward quickly on the mitigating measures, which is really at the source of many of our complaints that certainly John Pierce and I get from residents in the southwest of Paris, but I'm sure Steve and Lucas will get them in the north end. So can you say something about the pace with which we can deal with addressing whether these mitigating strategies can work, and when can they be implemented?
Through the chair, I'll defer this particular question just because a lot of that implementation lies with operations and with our bylaw enforcement folks, and I'll just ask them to chime in with that.
Through the chair, it would depend on what direction we go with some of these mitigating. There's three options here. There's apron parking, there's boulevard, and then there's a tremendous amount of signage that would have to go with this. There's also the parking restrictions that my colleague Greg Bergeron will talk to with the bylaw about moving that 2 meter to 1 meter, 1.5 meters. So there's a lot of things that have to be thought through here. It's not simply something that we could do in a short time. There'll be budget implications here. There'd be a tremendous amount of signage that would have to be converted for some of the things that are being proposed here, and I think Brandon has done an excellent job laying that out in his report here of some of the challenges of that. Does that answer?
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. Through the chair, I understand the practicalities of it, Greg, but I think what we've got here is a situation where the bylaw changes that Brandon is recommending are great for future developments, but we have a today problem. And I think we have to put some energy behind that, and some, if it costs us, it's going to cost us. But if we don't, we're going to run into some very difficult problems, because even as we speak, we see more and more developments coming along which are exactly of the same kind that have caused the problem to date. So that, for example, the Lozani development on Rest Acres Road, 101 new townhomes in an area that's already...
I'm going to stop you, Councillor Bell, because that's not a question.
I'm getting there. My question is, how quickly can we get this done, and can I have some indication that I can share with our residents on the timeline?
That will be determined.
I can speak to that through you, Mr. Chair. Some of the bylaw passages, I guess, can be changed relatively quickly, particularly the 2 meter parking. We can change that to 1 meter in short order. The problem is that, you know, we would have to submit a revised set fine order. So we had discussions about, you know, doing that. However, it would probably be beneficial if we were to come forward and do, you know, more than one bylaw revision at a time. There's been some discussion about allowing parking on both sides of the street, which we are investigating. There are some implications in the parking bylaw in relation to that. I think we just have to have those conversations as a group just to make sure that it's well thought out and, you know, that we're not missing anything. But from my perspective, I think once we make a decision that we want to move forward and, you know, council endorses that decision or provides that recommendation, we can certainly get the wheels going on that sooner rather than later. There are some things that, you know, Greg Demerce's group will have to consider and study a little bit deeper than we may have to.
Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Councillor Bell just asked one of my questions there because he's exactly right. We've got an issue now, and these quick wins I think are where we should be focusing. I still didn't get, like, are we potentially talking, you know, 3 to 6 months, 6 months to a year to 18 months? I'm just trying to, and I appreciate everything that's been said, but I'm just, as Councillor Bell said, we're just looking for, and not to stick you to it, but are we talking 6 months potentially to do these quick wins?
Who wants to answer that?
Through the chair, for my perspective, no, I think we can do it much sooner than that. I would, you know, venture to guess that we can do a turnaround time on the parking bylaw, probably March or April.
Fantastic.
You know, it would be the short wins, and, you know, just changing those the restrictions for, you know, 2 meters to 1 meter, I think would have an impact.
Absolutely.
By the same token, you know, I think we have to be prepared that we're going to get complaints for and against, right? So, you know, with that, when you make changes, you're also going to get complaints about people that are saying the vehicles are too close.
Yep, absolutely, duly noted on that. Again, just a final comment, if I could, Mr. Chair, thank you for this report. There's a lot of information in there that everybody thinks they know or knew, but it's documented there, and as we say, the stats don't lie, so I appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, you know, I know it's a good report when I read it. I just say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So a lot of good stuff in there. Mr. Chair, I think it needs to be done because I don't think it's fair to ask bylaw to enforce nonsensical rules when you're asking for a 2 meter separation between entrance and a parked vehicle, but we only go 9.5 meters between driveways. So I think the fact that this has been undertaken is a great thing. What I'm wondering about, and through you to Brandon, and maybe you can answer this tonight, maybe you can't, but at least I want you to think about it. Because you mentioned in there about lower boulevard parking. Now, when I go to a new subdivision, where do you see new trees planted in that section? So I'm just wondering, and we're always trying to get our tree coverage up, our forest coverage up. I'm just wondering, is it going to impact that? Is it going to impact the planting of new trees in new subdivisions?
Through the chair, I may ask actually Julie Tott to chime in about this a little bit more as well, but that's definitely something we've thought of. There are trade-offs to that, and Julie can maybe speak to some of the requirements in new subdivisions for curbing in the boulevards.
Thank you, Brandon. Through you, Mr. Chair. With the low boulevard parking, it would be the existing driveway apron where parking would be permitted. So there should not be any impact to the utility boxes or trees within the boulevard. We are also implementing barrier curbs, so that will clearly define where a driveway is placed so that people are parked on the street correctly. And if we do implement the lower boulevard driveway apron parking, then that will be clearly defined where a vehicle can and cannot park. I do know that Greg Demers is looking at the maintenance aspect of that and how that may work or not work for us.
Okay, through your chair, Mr. Chair, thank you for the answer. I just know sometimes when you solve one problem, you create two new problems, and I don't want to see that. So think as far ahead as you can. So appreciate it.
Any more questions? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 137 of the report, you talk about potential amendments to the zoning bylaw. And item 3 on the top of the page says where the frontage of the property is less than 9.5 metres, the garage or carport structure shall be set back a minimum of 11 metres from the sidewalk to facilitate tandem parking opportunities. Did you get any reaction from the developers when you shared that?
Through the chair, yes, there's always reaction. But we have had some good discussions about it as well. I think there are opportunities to kind of give a little and take a little in some situations. So maybe that's looking at the front yard setback for the remainder of the house and allowing some further encroachment towards the road. That way, it comes down a bit to a design and the design of the lot itself. And how they place their product, the homes on the properties. So I think as long as we're in good discussion with the developers and trying to see where we can kind of meet in the middle with that regard, I think they know the intent of what we're trying to do. But yes, we've had some positive feedback and some negative feedback with that regard.
Any more questions? No more discussion. Thank you, Brandon, for the report. Well done. Very long report, but well thought out. Questions been on the floor? All those in favor? No communication. Report from the CEO.
Through the chair to the committee, just a couple of items I would like to update committee members on, and one of them just relates back to a report that went through our council here in December, and that was around an update or a refresh to the county strategic plan, and we laid out a process during that report to committee. Just a reminder that we're moving forward with that. The public-facing engagement piece of that starts in the next couple of weeks. There will be outreach to members of council as well included in that, but just really a reminder that that is going to get underway to the community, and it's a kind of a comprehensive engagement process as was followed last time, and certainly the input of council is critical as well in that process, but that will start in the next couple of weeks. And if I could, to members of the committee, and certainly I haven't had an opportunity to do this yet publicly, and I know this is somewhat dated and it's old news, but I wanted to acknowledge Pam Dusling, who is our, as we all know, our General Manager of Development Services. And back in November, this is old news, mid-November of 2022, Pam undertook her successful PhD thesis examination at the University of Guelph in Rural Studies in the School of Environmental Design, and Pam presented her qualifying exam on the impacts of on-farm diversification of the family farm and the intersection of land preservation through public policy in Ontario. So we're very, very fortunate to have someone as qualified as Pam as part of this team, and I wanted to acknowledge to the committee and publicly the great work Pam's done, and that is a significant accomplishment, and just my congratulations as well.
Congratulations against Pam. Other business, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. As you know, I'm running to represent Zone 3 on Roma. Voting occurs next Monday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Sheraton. When I sat down and thought about it, there's so many issues Roma could and should be working on that are pertinent to our county. A few of them I noted, and there's more, but and they affect like a lot of the municipalities in Zone 3. I think in Ontario, talk about long ambulance wait times at hospitals, joint and several liability, broadband rollout, medical cannabis, natural gas expansion, regional transit, recent bills from the province eroding our rights to plan our communities and protect what's important to our citizens. There's more. In over the years, these are matters I'm very familiar with. So I'd like to see Roma get more involved with that and help us all out. I want to say who's going? Mayor Bailey, Councillor Chambers, Coleman, Bell, Kyle, Oakley, and Garneau, and myself. I just want to say I do not take your support for granted, but you know I work very hard. I read everything. I prepare for the meetings, and my attendance at the meetings is near perfect. When I was on holidays last year in South Carolina, I didn't miss the meeting. I simply zoomed in. When it's my 30th wedding anniversary, for those that were here, I was here as well, which is okay because my wife doesn't get to vote for the Roma director. So, is this being televised? So, anyways, again, voting next Monday, and just keep me in mind when you vote. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Miller. I hope your wife is not watching this right now. So, remember, I told you how you have to help win. Bring booze. Councilor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to give an update on the first and perhaps the only meeting of the ad hoc committee on unintended consequences of urban intensification. Quite a mouthful. Just to refresh people, at the last Admin and Operations Committee meeting, we passed a motion which said that it's recommended to Council to create an ad hoc committee of Council with, but not limited to, the following terms of reference: to review all applicable bylaws, plans and policies, and identify concerns related to the unintended consequences of urban intensification, and then to report these concerns with recommendations on how to address them to Council no later than June 2023 with interim reports. So we had the meeting earlier this afternoon, and I have to say there was some confusion about what we were there for. I felt that we were there to address all known and emerging unintended consequences of urban intensification. Some of my colleagues thought we were there simply to discuss the issue of structures in rear yards. So we had a bit of a backwards and forwards on that. But ultimately, we agreed that we would work through a list of consequences that I had identified, and I invited the committee to add more, which we got some of. But the general feeling was many of these things were actually being addressed or could be addressed by existing county committee structures. And so just to give you a flavor, the first two or three, we talked about parking, and clearly tonight we've discussed that, so that one was ticked off the list. We talked about fireworks bylaw implications, which is in the works with bylaw. When we got down to inappropriate structures in backyards, it was probably the only one, ultimately, that didn't have a home or a piece of work that was ongoing around it. So a motion was put on the floor to direct staff to look at this and come forward with recommendations. That was carried, and so staff will come back in the future with recommendations. But I think the sense I had was we have a lot of things that are impacted by urban intensification, and they're being dealt with, as we found out, in many pockets of our business, but we don't collectively step back and look at the total consequence of intensification. And so we had quite a backwards and forwards about, was this the right forum for this meeting? And I will admit, I thought when we signed up for an ad hoc committee, we could do it in that way. We could go in the room next door, 5 of us, and that was it. We could get on and deal with it. Can't do that. It is a formal committee of council, and therefore it goes through the full process. So it has to be on the agenda of the county. We need a clerk there. We need to follow the agenda process. We need to write minutes. So it needs to be publicly open. So it became a little bit more formalized, a little less free-flowing than I would have expected. And to be honest, I felt that we convinced ourselves collectively as a committee that, yes, we were dealing with every little piece of it, but we weren't stepping back and seeing the big picture. And that big picture is going to continue to progress. As we saw from Brandon's presentation, you know, there are lots more subdivisions to come that will compound the problems that we have now. If there was an intensification index on Paris, let's call it today, a year ago it was 1, this year it's 1.2, in 10 years' time it's going to be 2 or more. It's going to get more and more intensive, and the issues are going to come more and more to us. So ultimately, the committee agreed that we had addressed all the issues, or were addressing all the issues, and the motion was made to dissolve the committee, which was carried. So I am personally disappointed, I have to say that we did not step back and see the big picture, but in all truth, every little item is being addressed, with the exception of the one that we gave a motion to today to get addressed. But I do think, going back to what the CAO was saying earlier, when we look at the strategic plan update, we need to step back and not get lost in the details, but zoom up to 30,000 feet and look down at what's happening in our county, how it's growing. And right now, when the official plan ultimately gets approved, my suspicion is that we're going to find that it is an official plan that we know plus something else. And that plus something else is going to get dictated to us by the province, and we need to be ready to respond to what might come and what is coming. And I think we're doing the minimum at the moment. I don't think we're doing a good job as a leadership group to step back and say, how should this county manage going forward through a period of rapid growth, which is only going to intensify in the coming years. But I do thank the ad hoc committee for their time this afternoon, and the staff that joined us. I do think we've got coverage of all the individual items, but as I said, I think we're missing the big picture. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything else for the betterment? Councillor Chambers.
Just if I could make a couple comments, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for my voice. It's not great. I will say I'm a little bit disappointed as well. Procedurally, I'm not sure that an ad hoc committee can just dissolve themselves. It has to be dissolved by council, is one thing. So the report has to come to council, and then council is the one that decides whether the ad hoc committee has achieved its mandate or not. So keep that in mind. The other thing is this. I can't help but think that if something like this was carried out 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, someone may have come up with the concern that parking may be an issue in the future. And if that happened back 6 or 5 years ago, we might not be having some of the issues of intensification that we're having right now. So it was my hope that perhaps the members of the committee could look at things like that, look outside of the box, and perhaps head off things that may come in the future that we don't know about today. So I'm not a member of the committee, and I appreciate and I respect the members of the committee, but the way to think is to have a report, official report, and council is the one that receives the report, and the committee at that time. So again, I share the Councillor, and hopefully if someone does have something, an insight into a crystal ball of what a problem somewhere down the road that intensification is going to occur that we may not even know about now, but we're on the cusp of intensification. So maybe the people that are here 6 or 7 or 10 years from now may regret not looking at some of the things that may have sparked an interest in someone's mind. That having been said, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude, and I've used up my voice for the night. So, and I will thank Councillor Bell for putting the effort into it to chair the meeting.
Thank you, Councilor Chambers. Thank you, Councilor Bell, for your work you're trying to get done this and whatnot. I know it doesn't always go the way we always want it to go. You know that as well as I do. Anything else? Motion to go in camera. Whoop.
No, it's okay. After we go on camera, we'll just do it.
Motion to go in camera. Councilor Pierce, Councilor House, all those in favor? Carried. Ready, Gary? Call this meeting back to order. Any more business? Next meeting will be February the 14th, 2023. You may need to bring some Valentines, Mr. Miller, for. I'll adjourn the meeting. All adjourned. Thank you.